Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Tuesday, May 14th, 2024. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And media commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
So some of our June 24 issue is up online. We're about to discuss Abe Greenwald's magisterial article in the issue, The Woke Jihad. But before we get to that, I guess we need to talk a little bit about the Trump trial and former Trump fixer Michael Cohen's first day in court. And we're not in the courtroom, and I'm not really reading the transcripts. All I can do is follow the coverage. And once again, we're living in two separate universes or existences, because our dear friend Annie McCarthy and Jonathan Turley in the New York Post, both of them found the Cohen testimony both entirely beside the point in terms of the actual charges that Trump is facing, and procedurally highly questionable in terms of what it is that the judge is and is not allowing people to say or not say, gagging Trump but gagging no one else, and allowing things in that in a conventional trial on matters like, did you fraudulently somehow cook the books, in a way that would elevate the crime that we are talking about from a misdemeanor to a felony, because it supposedly hides a second crime that for some psychotic reason in New York courtrooms you don't seem to have to name. You don't have to name what the crime is that makes the other crime from a misdemeanor into a felony. So perhaps criminal procedure should be looked at in New York state law to figure out why this extraordinary latitude has been given to prosecutors and judges to just sort of declare things that aren't things because of some other thing that you don't have to say what the thing is, which does really just not seem like the American way of life. But what everybody seems to agree with is that Cohen's testimony was uncommonly revelatory of the fact that he is a scumbag and Trump is a scumbag. Now, I agree with both of these interpretations. Just don't know how that rises to the level of felonious conduct, that the two of them are scumbags together, behaving like scumbags and doing scumbaggy things like withholding bonuses and then not withholding bonuses and saying Melania is fine with this, or if she breaks up with me, I won't be single for long. All the stuff that Cohen was saying. And once again, it's now been 3 or 4 weeks of this trial, and we haven't gotten to the crime at all.
And I think after the Stormy Daniels testimony and after just Cohen's very first day on the stand, it's also a reminder, I don't know, again, what the jury thinks, but it's a reminder to anyone tuning in that there are no good actors in this drama. I mean, Cohen was disbarred, even if he is being honest and saying that he was secretly recording his own, recording Trump acting as his lawyer. That's completely ethically questionable. And it doesn't sound like it's all that believable that he was doing it just to protect Trump or to make sure he's got this whole narrative that he's devised after the fact to make himself seem like a martyred witness, standing up for truth. Stormy Daniels did a version of the same. It just doesn't quite hold, because as they get questioned and cross-examined, they're genuinely compromised and questionable characters are revealed.
Look, we said last week, and I think it's generally said, that under most conventional circumstances, if your two star witnesses were Stormy Daniels, a woman who sells her body for money and then signs legal documents that she then desperately seeks to violate and all of that, the impeachment of her as a reliable witness by the defense would be such a foregone conclusion that any in mens rea terms, any rational DA would not want to bring a case that relied very heavily on her, because a jury is not going to find her an admirable or compelling witness necessarily. And then the same with Cohen. It was not only, as you say, disbarred, he is a convicted perjurer and fraudster who was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison that he did not serve because he got out because of COVID. And is apparently right now peddling a reality show, which is what is in Jonathan Turley's op-ed in the New York Post. He is trying to sell a reality show to a streamer. And so his testimony this week will be critical in determining whether or not his behavior rises to the level of, boy, people are going to watch this guy on a reality show. So his demeanor is very different from what it has been in his life. He is being very deferential and quiet and all of that. Hope Hicks last week said that he was a fixer only to the extent that he made messes that he then had to fix. We all saw him. We've watched him over the last 6 or 7 years. He's gross. He's a criminal. He falsified taxi cab licenses and all kinds of things. It is a great sorrow to me that he was for a time the chairman of the board of trustees of my high school alma mater, the Columbia Grammar and Preparatory School, something which is, I think, a heartbreak to them as well. He is a very, very unimpressive person, only known to us because he was one of these people that Trump, desperately tries to who Trump uses because they are so mediocre that everything about them attaches to him. But I want to get back to so two things. One is we're still not at the crime yet. So he now says Trump agreed to, pay off Stormy Daniels and then pay him back. Right? That was sort of like the conclusion of the day. The crime is how the money was allocated and listed in a ledger and was done, every single month. And so every single month was in Bragg's indictment, a separate version of the same misdemeanor offense that then suddenly became a felony because he was violating some unknown law. And according to Andy, and what you can tell, the unknown law is federal finance law, which is not something that a local district, that is federal law. Local district attorney is dealing with state law. So he cannot have committed a misdemeanor. He cannot have committed a federal felony that raises a locally charged misdemeanor into a felony. It is outside his writ. So basically, this is an entirely a nullification strategy where what they're asking the jury to do essentially is to find Donald Trump guilty of being a scumbag. And that is their strategy. And it appears, since they are never getting to the heart or meat of the matter, that is all they're doing. So they're having Stormy Daniels say whatever they say. They're going to have Michael Cohen say whatever he wants to say. The judge is, Dean Wormer, saying, "You'll get your chance, smart guy. You're on double secret probation. I'm now gagging you," whatever. Like, the judge is like, "I hate this guy. I hate Trump. If you like me, jury members, you will take from my demeanor how much I hate Trump and rule accordingly."
And Stormy Daniels, the type of testimony she gave follows that, right? I mean, she played a victim in a way she hasn't before, from what I've seen. And it's just, she's scarred by the whole experience, right? And she hates him. And
she alleged the sexual assault.
Yeah, there's all this stuff that wasn't there before.
She said, and then she blacked out, and she was lying back on the bed, and nothing like this had ever happened to her before. All she does in life is lie back on a bed.
But also none of her emotional response to whatever happened has anything shines any light on the crime. Like, in other words, everything, even the testimony of the witnesses for it are geared toward make these people think Trump is the worst person in the world.
Right.
And not seeing, even from the witnesses, there's not really a strategy to say he's a lawbreaker. It's really just pile it on. But Stormy has, she's been in the public eye for a while now over this. I mean, Trump was elected 8 years ago to the presidency. And so we haven't seen her play this particular role, and now she is, and it feels like that's to make up for the fact that I thought as Politico said, 3 people attended that meeting, Cohen, Trump, and Alan Weselberg. Of the 3, Cohen and Weselberg are convicted felons, and then there's Trump. So I feel like that's like the heart of the matter there. It's like, so if you're bringing Stormy Daniels on, she's not there to offer legal insight into this misdemeanor / felony / whatever. But we know what happened. The whole point is, was somebody paid off a certain way? Did the money come from?
It's like,
but her retelling
Trump
of it
looks like the only adult in that room. That's the odd thing, right?
Yeah.
Weirdly.
But it's like 3 men in a room, and 2 of them, one of them's still in prison, the other one is out because of COVID, and there he is on the stand, and the third one is Trump. Like that's the meeting. That's the case. Those 3 guys are the case. They're the only guys who know whether a crime was committed. Those 3. That's it.
But it's like the overall production, like they want to almost put on like a Defending Your Life kind of show, like just bring in everyone just to say, so you're not really see, this guy is not a good guy, and now
Like
we're going to show you
the
Seinfeld
finale.
Why he's not
or defending your life, where it's
Defending Your Life.
Let's go back in time and see a moment where you humiliated yourself.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. I mean, they're just milking it. They don't want it. We haven't gotten to a crime yet. They don't want to get to a crime anytime soon.
Right. Okay. So there's that part of the story, and then there is the part of the story that I find irresistible, which is the lionization of Michael Cohen. So beginning last weekend, before he was going to hit the stand on Monday, Chris Hayes tweets out, Michael Cohen's a really smart guy. He's really able, and he's clever, and I think he's going to be a really good witness. What? He has no more insight into Michael Cohen than you or any of us does, based on what's happened over the last 7. We heard the phone call where he's like, boss, I missed you. I missed you, boss. I really want to let me come to Washington, boss. Right. And then, like sitting there before the House committee where Elijah Cummings said to him, now you're going to be serving prison, and I hope that this is a moment where you and your family can learn and heal and grow, and you've said you understand your mistakes. He understands his mistakes. What kind of garbage has this? Are they pet? Like, there's that thing the Michael Cohen has transcended because he has decided to turn tail. This is years ago, right? But okay, so that was Chris Hayes. All through the day yesterday, George Conway, Norm Eisen, this kind of anti-Trump legal bar, it was as though, I'm trying to think of who, it was as though that moment comes in a trial when a saintly doctor comes to the stand to reveal that the case that the corporation is making against the idea that the corporation gave you cancer, why it is that he, as the doctor who had to go through these cases, knows that the corporation polluted the waters and gave you cancer, right? He's really knocking it out of the park. I didn't expect, said Norm Eisen, one time White House ethics counsel, I didn't expect that his testimony would be as compelling and striking as it was. And, George Conway was like, he's really knocking it out of the park, and okay, maybe they really have all lost their minds. and that they could listen to Michael Cohen, a man who graduated from Eastern, Southern, Northern Michigan State Osteopathy Junior College and School of Law, and graduated at the bottom of his class, and say, boy, he's a really good lawyer and a really excellent witness. By the way, that's pretty close to where he graduated from. Look it up. I mean, I'm obviously exaggerating here. MSNBC has turned itself into the Michael Cohen fan club and support group. Am I taking crazy pills?
But look, didn't they do this? They do this with anyone who comes up against Trump. He's like the new Michael Avenatti.
Yes.
You know?
But he also is feeding the media in a way that they love to be fed, because one of the things that Cohen's always talking about is the press. Like, he'll bring up the press and be like, I think, didn't he say, he's like, oh, with the press, they said something that angered him. I would reach out to the press. I would express to them their need to redact. Like, this is part of his testimony, is kind of playing into the press's hands by flattering their pretensions about their importance and all the important role they play, and oh, mea culpa. And so they're giving him that treatment in part because he's also flattering them.
And I wouldn't be surprised, by the way, if he has another fall in his future, because whenever
he could have a fall in 2 days when the prosecution impeaches him, because the prosecutor is going to say, Mr. Cohen, what did you plead guilty to? And what did you plead guilty to after that? And by the way, when you were out on limited release because of COVID, did you violate the terms of your parole by wandering and going around to restaurants when you were under house arrest? And Mr. Cohen, please explain to us how you defrauded taxi cab license holders of their money and then didn't pay your taxes. Oh, and Mr. Cohen, when you worked for Donald Trump, how many crimes did you commit at his direction? Either was it at his direction, or did you just commit the crimes? Like, he is the most easily destroyed witness. That's why I say a conventional prosecutor would never have brought this case under the principles of prosecutorial discretion, because he's not a credible witness. He is the definition of a not credible witness. He has everything to gain by perjuring himself to get himself through this trial, including a reality show. And he's already proved that he's willing to perjure himself on the stand because he was convicted of perjury, among other things. And that's like Wednesday. That's not even like in the future he's really going to pay for his sins. Like, he'll pay for his sins, I don't know, before Arbor Day, he'll pay for his sins.
And whenever they elevate these people just because they oppose Trump, and they lionize these people whose characters can't really stand up to public scrutiny, but they turn them into a hero of the moment, there's a crash. They break, like Avenatti, like Andrew Cuomo. They will take whatever is at hand and turn them into like a prince, and then on their own they turn into a frog.
Avenatti was Superman. Avenatti, I mean, that, right, Avi? That was like.
What did he go to jail?
Is he a presidential?
He defrauded
contender?
his own clients. He defrauded his own clients, I believe.
Yeah, who was
the Nike case, wasn't it?
Nike, yeah.
Not just Nike.
Oh, and Stormy Daniels.
And Stormy Daniels.
Stormy Daniels.
Yeah, whose book advance he stole. Right? Okay, so here's my point. We can already see.
And her husband, so there was a marital, their relationship was at the center of a marital infidelity claims also, right? I mean, as it's happening.
I mean, if those two crazy kids can't keep it together, what hope is there for the rest of us? Seriously. I'm sorry.
It's just like this was all happening as it was happening.
Right. Okay,
like, we didn't look back. Like, we're watching. We're all watching this progress in real time. We're watching like every train wreck during the Avenatti period happen, and every new revelation. We're like, oh yeah, that sounds about right.
So just to make this clear, so I think that Trump should have been impeached and convicted for January 6th. I believe that he has probably violated numerous crimes in his life. But working to cover up a bribe, a perfectly legal bribe that he paid to somebody because he was running for president and either didn't want to have his wife turn on him or was trying to keep this out of the news in order to help his chances for being president, how that rises to the level of a crime and the possibility that Trump will be convicted on the grounds that he interfered with the good working order of an election because he did not expose the contents of his private diary to the public. Going forward, this creates a standard for behavior that literally no person running for office will ever be able to meet. And it's also none of their business. Is it our business? It is our business judging Trump's character to say that he's disgusting. He did this, he did that. He's an adulterer. He talked this way on the Access Hollywood tape and all of that. But is that criminal suppression to thwart the, legitimate results of an election by trying to keep a story under wraps? I mean, whataboutism says, hey, what Hunter Biden's laptop, everybody. I mean, like, there is no crime. That's why he was never indicted by the Merrick Garland Justice Department or anybody else. It was Alvin Bragg who said, as a way of getting himself elected, that he would go after Trump however he could. That created this unbelievably novel idea that that the misallocation or the misassignation of these checks, a misdemeanor, if they even happen in the way that he says they did, could somehow then be treated as a felony so that he could try him as a criminal. Now, everything that we're saying here, and I'm saying this as somebody who is not a fan of Trump's and not a supporter of Trump's, I don't think that the people who watch MSNBC or a lot of people in America even have any idea of what I'm saying. They're just in the category of, I hate Trump. I want the world to know how awful Trump is. And if the jury convicts him on the basis of being a scumbag and not actually on legitimate grounds, if this is a case of reverse jury nullification where they basically find him guilty, not for the charge, but for his person, they'll be happy. And that's all they care about. And who cares, because it will all be reversed. I mean, I have no doubt that Merchan's behavior here is like, 250 cases of reversible error and counting. But of course, that'll happen later. That it'll take a year for that conviction to be reversed. But they don't know that we think this way, or they think we argue the way that we're arguing, that we're somehow Trump acolytes or MAGA maniacs or something like that. And they're the maniacs. I mean, they're the maniacs who, like, lionizing and elevating Michael Cohen, saying that somebody criticizing Stormy Daniels in an impeachment effort is slut-shaming somebody who has appeared in 600 hardcore pornographic films, meaning that she has committed at least 600 public acts of sex for money, thus making her a prostitute, that is slut-shaming? I mean,
it's just marketing, actually. So
it's only slut-shaming to say somebody is morally depraved because she likes to have sex a lot and isn't taking money for it. Not slut-shaming Stormy Daniels by describing her life and career and seeing how it is that ordinary people might feel about her, the way that she behaves and has involved herself in a profession that is destroying the sexual manners and mores of an entire generation.
It is one of the weird glitches of our somewhat libertarian culture on that score. I once, for my sins, had to debate a prostitute on Fox News on Hannity and Colmes years and years ago when I was just a child. And the only thing that gets them is to ask, when they speak proudly about their sex work, is to say, okay, that's great. Who in the room, and this is what the prosecution should ask the jury, who wants their daughter to grow up to have her career? Raise your hand if you're and to any of the people who are going on and on about how sex workers were okay. Would you want your daughter to do that? But people have an instinct about the character and life choices of people like Stormy Daniels. And you're right. It is not slut shaming to point out, not a great thing to spend your time doing. A lot of risks there for a woman.
And as I say, Michael Cohen has now demonstrated that Michael Cohen has a personal vested interest in doing what the prosecutor says and acting the way the prosecutor wants, so that he then is treated kindly by the prosecutor and can go off and sign a deal for a reality TV show. So he is acting in his own financial interest. Again, extremely impeachable if the Trump lawyers are effective. And last week, it appeared that Susan Michelis, who was the person who cross-examined Stormy Daniels, did a really good job. And how do I know she did a really good job? I'm not there, and this is all about the 12 people on the jury. Because she got attacked by the psychotic anti-Trump bar for slut-shaming Stormy Daniels. I'm like, well, you know what? If they're saying what she did was unconscionable because she mischaracterized Stormy Daniels in a way that isn't fair to the jury, I'm like, maybe she scored a lot of points there. Maybe she did what she had to do in impeaching. Remember, we're just trying to get, if you're the Trump team, you're trying to get to beyond a reasonable, to say you are not passing the smell test that these crimes were committed beyond a reasonable doubt. And if what you're relying on are these two people, a porn star and a convicted felon, to prove that he committed 31 felonies or however many we're at now, you're going to have a hard time. And so, but again, this is not anything that anybody thinks, and Andy McCarthy thinks that they'll probably they'll secure a guilty conviction, and I would hesitate to question any such judgment of somebody who has won himself as many convictions as he did when he was a prosecutor. But remember, you only need one juror to hang. You only need one juror to say, I'm not going along with this story. I'm sorry. It doesn't pass the smell test for me. Okay. So that is our Trump court coverage. And it's exciting. It's like court TV. Remember court TV? Like
MSNBC. There's a great SNL skit, Saturday Night Live skit years ago, and I think that it was MSNBC they were lampooning, but it was during the Clinton Lewinsky thing, and the skit was the anchors who were covering the Lewinsky testimony and all the Clinton stuff were in their pajamas, and it was a slumber party.
Yeah.
That's what this reminds me.
I just think it's funny because court TV practically invented modern cable television, and then it died. I don't know. It's
no, but there are all sorts of other versions now, aren't there?
Right. Well, everything is court TV, right? So right. I guess court TV, the specificity of court TV,
right,
lost its luster. But anyway, the nostalgia for court TV is itself kind of weird. Nancy Grace, remember Nancy Grace?
Of course.
Okay. I'm old, so I'm going through my, Nancy Grace, that was crazy. Abe, lead article in our our June 2024 issue is called "The Woke Jihad," and Abe, would you be so kind as to lay out your dominant theory?
Happily. So when the protests erupted, first on the streets and then on the campuses, the pro-Hamas hordes came out. There was a sort of general sense of stupefaction by onlookers who weren't deeply involved in these issues and monitoring them. And people were saying, I don't understand. They're not. Are they really for Hamas? I'm sure they're just they just want to, stop the killing, and they just want to see Palestinians free, but they're saying, from the river to the sea, and there's and glory to our martyrs, and various and Intifada revolution, and globalize the Intifada and all the rest of it. So people were like sort of baffled by all this. And so basically I kind of undertook to explain why it's not at all baffling. That, first of all, yes, they are pro-terrorist, and why it's not baffling, and why it's completely in keeping with social justice movements of this century generally. And as I say in the piece, the first thing you have to understand is that the nominal cause of any social justice movement is irrelevant. Black Lives Matter was not about saving Black lives. Trans activism is not about protecting trans youth, and on it goes. It's about these are the cover stories that cover for this larger impulse to tear it all down and to destroy the West, the United States, its allies, Israel. There's always been I wouldn't even call it a strain. It is there's a sort of fundamental building block in this, which is anti-Semitism, which was always there, which was there from the start of the Black Lives Matter movement, and other movements. So this is completely in keeping with the social justice ethos. What happened to the left these many years after 2020, when they sort of had the establishment eating out of the palms of their hands over defunding police and our racist inevitability, the inevitability of our historic racism and its sort of permanence in our society, and everyone was donning their kente cloths and reading White Fragility, and those days are actually over. This is now almost 4 years later, and defund the police was a disaster, because of course Black Lives Matter wasn't about helping Black lives. Defund the police just took police out of areas that needed them most, and violent crime, including homicide, spiked everywhere that happened. And the affirmative gender treatment, the gender affirming care for minors, whereby medical professionals and the educational establishment and whomever else reassures a kid who comes in and says, "I think I'm the other sex," and does everything in their power to keep that delusion alive, and promotes medical procedures for it. That has begun to get a lot of blowback. There's been a lot of whistleblowers from inside the institutions that are promoting that and facilitating that. So they didn't have they didn't have the stuff of revolution to work with. So this was a perfect opportunity for them to seize on the quote pro-Palestinian cause, and scream about quote genocide. And this gave them a new animating idea to rally the troops, to get attention, and basically an excuse to go out and disrupt the world with. For the jihadists part here, this was a wonderful tactical development on their end, because they actually succeeded in getting the identitarian left to believe that jihadist terrorists are like a downtrodden identity group victim. So they are now alongside, they fit somewhere into the intersectional axis, between trans black kids and who knows who else. Now there's the terrorists that we should feel sorry for. But it's also, as I say in the piece, it's not just that. the jihadists want and succeeded in getting the woke to scream for an economic war on Israel, to divest, boycott, and sanction Israel. That was a big tactical move, and all of it is well funded, well organized. I mean, it's very well documented by commentaries, contributing editor Jonathan Schanzer, who's at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. This is all, and we've talked about this before in the show briefly. The funding comes from overtly pro-Hamas people who were shut down, who are targeted as raising funds for Hamas in groups in the past. They have now reconstituted in new groups that are behind this movement, and it's funded in part by Qatar, giving billions, untold billions, to these schools, where they can that enables them to get the message of the Qatari message across at things like academic conferences and hirings and whatever else. And of course, a large part of it is funded by standard big money Democratic donors, because they always the liberal establishment always wants to get in on the radical action a bit.
So I have a question, because the piece, which is wonderful, everybody should read it. At the end, I sensed, maybe I'm wrong, a slightly optimistic note from Abe, which is a little off-brand for him. But you point out, I think correctly, that one of the reasons that the response to this movement in particular was swifter and harsher than it was during Black Lives Matter is that the anti-Americanism was so pervasive, and the foreign influence, and the sort of burning American flags and covering George Washington and Kafia and Palestinian flags was so clearly offensive to so many people who might not otherwise follow these sorts of protests that, they had to crush them. But here's my question. On a lot of these campuses, what we are seeing is not necessarily, they might have moved the protesters off the quad, but some of the administrators are also negotiating with these kids. So they are caving to them on principles that then move the Overton window a little bit, so that even if we don't see, tent encampments come fall at a lot of these universities, they might have claimed a sort of victory. And as we know from the history of academia and the capture of these institutions, it is a long march for these groups. They see this as a multi-generational enterprise. So I'm wondering, Abe, if you see this as just maybe the first battle in a much longer war, or where you might see it playing forward in the next year or so.
I should say I am totally optimistic, by the way, about this. I think it's great.
This is so great. Optimistic,
because they completely expose themselves all at once. I mean, after the stupefaction, I think a lot of Americans have already started to realize what I was trying to say in the piece. And yeah, the universities, of course, I mean, some of them have caved, and this will only hurt them. I don't think that will speak to what happens outside of academia. Part of the story here, I think, is that average Americans had no idea how crazy, how rotten, how off the wall universities were in terms of curricula, in terms of administration, all of it. Like this was almost like this closed up cult that no one knew what went on inside. And then this just showed it to everyone. So the administrators and the schools that want to keep going down this road, they will keep losing funding. The admissions will keep dropping. And parents of prospective students will not want to send them there.
Black Lives Matter had at root, pieces of video and audio evidence suggesting that policemen in certain cities had gone nuts in relation to Americans that they had held in custody, and they were therefore portrayed as the villain. And the idea was that this showed an indifference in American life to the sufferings of ordinary Black people. And the evidence, though it was totally anecdotal and false in its own way, and particularly say in the Michael Brown case in Ferguson was completely misleading. Nonetheless, it was there. It was visual evidence that was unmistakable of confrontations between police officers and African Americans, or in some cases, ordinary citizens and African Americans, like the three guys in Georgia who followed the guy around the housing development, or the suburban cul-de-sac, and then shot him. All the evidence here is on the other side. That's what's interesting, is the evidence is a massacre, people getting their arms blown off, people getting raped, the visual evidence of the destruction of the three kibbutzim, hostage videos, everything that provided evidence was the evidence of a monstrous set of acts perpetrated by one side against the other side. And I think this is where things started to be different. In American protesting about American wrongs, Vietnam, whatever you want to call it, right? Americans are involved. It's Americans who are going to go off to war, Americans who are being mistreated by the police, Americans who are being shot at Kent State, or Americans who are being mistreated by the cops. This is an event that took place 9,000 miles away in another country, in which unarmed civilians were massacred by the thousands, massacred and injured by the thousands by a force that does not hold a single liberal democratic value in its head, and is a believer in blood, a believer in Jewish eradication, and all of that. And so when people lined up with them, there were two paths they could take, right? One path was to say this was exhilarating, right? That's Russell Rickford, the professor at Cornell, or the Black Lives Matter Chicago branch making an illustration, a triumphant illustration of the paragliders who came in to shoot up the Nova Music Festival, right? That's the celebration of the violence, which happened almost instantly, right? A couple of days after October 7th happened. That did not go well, right? Then the Popular Front stuff started, which was, no, we need is a ceasefire. There's too much killing. There should be a ceasefire, right? That's just suffering Palestinian people. And so a ceasefire to make sure that the suffering ends. And that kind of, I think, gave it new life, or gave it sort of like, it became something more Popular Front, more palatable than, I just love watching Jews get murdered by psychotic Islamic fascists. That's my jam. That didn't hold much. And then when the Israelis actually started moving and doing what they had to do in Gaza, and then you had the footage of the war, and the war was Israel attacking sites in Gaza. And then, of course, as we know, there were all those fake accusations of Israel blowing up the hospital that the stray Gaza missile hit, and all of that. I think what's happened in the last 6 or 7 weeks is everything got muddled and confused, and then there was the hit on the Jose Andres food truck caravan, which seems to have been this kind of turning point for the Biden administration's ideas. But something happened in the last 6 weeks, really. So when Manoush Safik of Columbia testified before the House committee, and the encampments went up on the Columbia campus as she was speaking, and then the encampment strategy started. And it started like that. It started in hours, and suddenly everybody in America who was under 21 and believed in intersectionality had a Coleman tent at the ready to place on their quad. That's where the woke jihad became visible to everybody in America, I think, was really in the last couple of months, that you could say that these isolated, horrible cases of anti-Semitic loathsomeness, Russell Rickford, that professor at Humboldt, Cal Poly Humboldt, state who, like they spray painted free God, Jews should die, and various other things. The meeting at the Berkeley school board, where Holocaust survivors are being shouted down and called pigs and genociders and stuff like that. All of that sort of went along, but so something different happened with the embrace of the visuals that we saw, particularly at City College, but all over the place, where it did not look like we were in America. It looked like we were in Tehran, or I'm not Tehran, because when there are protests in Tehran, they're against the government, right? It looked like we were in Egypt under Mubarak or something like.
Well, and by the way, the protesters wanted that too. I mean, this is another aspect of this. They are so in love with the exoticism of the idea of jihad and Palestinian suffering that they mimicked it all. They started dressing like them. They were asking for humanitarian aid.
They got the hunger strikes. Don't forget
hunger strikes and
suffering of their
claiming
24-hour
chemical weapons were used on them by the police.
Rotary hunger striking, Christine, I think is what you meant to say.
That's right. They have to hand off.
You fast for a few hours. Rotary.
It's called intermittent fasting.
Proud tradition of rotary hunger.
Yeah. So this was, this is John, we've discussed this before. There's this sort of cosplaying aspect to all this. But to me, it doesn't really matter whether or not they're cosplaying, because I think cosplaying, dressing up in the outfits and playing the part is how you get into, is how you believe it for real. Symbolism is important, and if you embrace it, you become the thing.
Here's my question: they have the part of it is on the point that Christine made, which I also loved. I mean, the whole piece is great, but when I read the section Christine was talking about before, I was basically hearing in Abe's voice saying, "Nobody likes you." Because that's basically what you were saying at the end. Like, nobody likes you on this side. Nobody likes you on this side. Your combined powers are super unlikable. But I wanted to connect that with something you wrote earlier in the piece, which I thought was really interesting. You mentioned at one point about Qatar and some of the foreign financing and foreign donors to America's universities, how there's an actual measurable effect on anti-Semitism at the schools and also support for things like democracy and human rights and other stuff. In other words, they have, you had written that you could see the schools break bad, right, when they got this dirty money. And so my question is there the fact that they're unpopular and protests are not meant to, often these types of protest movements are not actually meant to win over anybody, right? I mean, they win over recruits, but they're not necessarily meant to flip public opinion. They're meant to, cause conflict and chaos and see what comes from that, right? So there's an unpopular people, unpopular ideas. There's this foreign money, and even if it wasn't foreign, there's this money coming in, influencing them. And I guess the question is, this doesn't seem great for democracy. And this was like for 8 years, we've been having a conversation about defending democracy and the importance of defending democracy. But it seems to me that policies are getting advanced through unpopular policies are getting advanced through violent and semi-violent means and cloudy funding structures. And this seems to me like precisely the sort of problem that for 8 years we've been told is at the center of all the West's troubles, right?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, and by the way, I think they are trying to change public opinion. I think that is part of it. But no, who's going to listen to them? I mean, as you said, and as I say in the piece, they are the woke at this point are detested by the average American, and obviously the jihadists never had a foothold in our culture. So the hatred against both these groups is so immediately apparent and just sort of came down on their heads, I think. Regarding the funding stuff, it's a huge problem. I don't mention the piece, but there's also, there's China. There is another problem with universities. That's a larger problem that
Right.
the U.S. needs to deal with and crack down on. But this is this is violent and undemocratic and corrupt. Yeah.
But there is the strategic framing of the way that this is where the Hamas propaganda and its useful idiots on college campuses have been so effective, which is we get frustrated. We keep constantly reminding them of the violence, the violent death cult that Hamas is. And look what it did on October 7th. We can't forget that. Why is everybody overlooking that? That's because these, particularly on college campuses, Hamas becomes about colonial oppression, right? So then it encourages even sort of well-intentioned people to think, oh, well, are any means necessary to come out from this struggle? And there's an interesting essay in The Hill recently by a Israeli studies scholar, and she points this out very well. She mentions, I think her name's Tamar Hoffnung, but it's a real strategy about how Hamas's targeting of civilians, Hamas's constant violations of international law and warfare are overlooked because they have cast themselves as a global victim. And I think until we have on our college campuses better educated students and less ideologically motivated professoriate and administrators, that is going to continue to be the framing. And that long term really does worry me because that doesn't get addressed.
Okay, here's how I view it. I view it as this is not a war for public opinion. What Qatar and what has happened over the last 20 years, including in the maybe even 30 years in the academy, is an effort to influence and control and direct elite opinion. This is not a mass thing. This is a top-down thing. And how do you do it? You sponsor professorships, you sponsor internship programs, you build buildings for Middle Eastern studies departments, you fund professorships so that students will come and study with you, get PhDs, and then go and seed other places. And then all of this then has its root in, let's just say, intersectionality, ethnic studies, all of that, which preceded Qatar spending $20 billion at American universities over the last 20 years. And so and the foundational support from the Tides Foundation and other places and the Open Society Institute and all of that creates a world in which ideas once unthinkable to American elites are now completely conventional. And it took a generation, but it happened. And I would even say that one of these infiltrative projects was the 1619 Project, which is a perfect example of how you take a potted series of ideas, ideologically based, you apply them to history falsely, you then create a narrative around them, and you get a major American institution like the New York Times to put all of its weight, all of its force, all of its publicity machine strength behind it. And then you have a set of ideas about the evils of America.
And you get it in schools, don't forget.
And
put it in the curriculum.
Right. And then like good economics, it trickles down. It trickles down from the elites into everywhere else. And the anti-Americanism is the point, and anti-Americanism and anti-Zionism are bizarrely connected. Now, there are many reasons, and we don't have time to go into them, and they all have to do with America being a country based on an idea and Israel being a country based on an idea. There are very few countries in the world that can claim this notion because that's not how nations are formed. I mean, we could go, again, this is like we could do seminars on this for, 60 hours. But the woke jihad is the perfect encapsulation of, or the perfect end product of a 20-year process of working to dominate and control, and maybe control is maybe not the word, seduce elite institutions into opening the Overton window to ideas that then start getting very uncomfortably close to jihad. And when this first started in the early 2000s, mid-2000s, when Joseph Mossad was up for tenure at Columbia and was saying things like there are no homosexuals in Iran because Islam forbids it, and because people at Columbia had a cow about the craziness of his ideas and all of that, then the tenure committee had to give him tenure. Otherwise, they would be joining the Jackals. That was not a moment of, it was not an exceptional moment. It was a foundational moment in which you start saying that it is okay for these ideas to take their place alongside ideas in the West that have been germinating, percolating for 2,000 years and have the strength of force of history and great thinkers and philosophers and human knowledge behind it. And then you just turn everything over time into this cesspool. And by the way, it's not going to be over in September. It's not over now. They're all graduating. I saw kids in Columbia gowns last night walking on the Upper West Side. They must have had some kind of, even though they canceled graduation, they must have had individual graduating ceremonies in various places. So there were kids in gowns going to, with their families or something, to dinner and all that. So something happened. Stuff's gone. The Harvard encampment went down this morning. They are going to be back at Labor Day. Don't you worry. You think this is over? This ain't over. You think the professoriate's effort to control and contain the administrations, or or not to keep the presidents of these universities scared witless at having to uphold minimal standards of order and decency, you think that's going to stop? This is the thing that they have wanted for decades. This is their 1960s. They're too young for the 60s. They're getting it. They're cosplaying it, but it's also real, just like Abe said. And by the way, the cosplayers are part of it. And then there are the real terrorists. Like, we know that in every one of these encounters, there were at Harvard, at the Hamilton Hall, they found how to stage, how to do a diversion, how to stage a this, how to use zip ties if you have to, how to hold hostages. There were documents there that these janitors found when the and the NYPD found when the building was cleared. Like, this is no joke.
I mean, do you remember the outrage when one or two of the January 6th protesters were seen to be carrying zip ties and other sort of, like, this was sort of held up as a major instance and a threat of domestic terrorism. I mean, it was,
and rightly so.
Yes,
exactly.
But the amount of emphasis on that, I think, is quite a contrast to the fact that those stories are not getting a ton of circulation in the mainstream.
They're not getting enough circulation because there's a noble porn star and a really, really remarkable perjurer and fraudster and convicted felon who have a lot to tell us about the way we live now and the bad choices that they
do, but not in the way they think.
Not in the way
the optimism versus pessimism argument reminds me of a few years ago. I commissioned a piece from Robbie Suave at Reason, the libertarian writer, about when I was at the Examiner, about the whole just woke thing, political correctness and cancel culture and all that, whatever. Essentially, cancel culture was the thing. And I remember I emailed him and I said, there's it seems to me like there's a backlash against cancel culture. Everybody's pretty fed up with it. Is there a piece here in it sort of cresting and finally, being on its way out and, stuff like that, this whole optimistic thing. And Robbie wrote me back and he said, well, I would write exactly the opposite. He said, I have a feeling it's going to get worse before it gets better, and probably much worse, because they've planted these people who think this way, right, in these corporations, and the 23-year-olds become 27-year-olds and become 30-year-olds and, whatever. And it was really funny because I was like, hey, it looks like people are really out of patience with this whole cancel culture thing and political correctness and woke, whatever you wanted to call it at the time. And he was like, that's true, but not actually enough to change it. In other words, once you make certain gains in a movement like this, you plant certain seeds and you can't just turn it back when people get annoyed by it.
But I think Abe is right to be optimistic in this sense, which is that it is always better for the enemy to be clearly defined. And while life is going to be hell if you made the mistake of accepting admission to Columbia, and it's going to be hell for some time to come, and at other places, and all of that. The 1960s showed us that the extremism that gripped the left and then infected liberals caused its own backlash. Remember, Nixon won 43% of the vote in 1968 and 61% of the vote in 1972. And it wasn't because he was any good a president. He did wage and price controls. He fought Vietnam. He did not somehow convince the American people that he was the greatest thing since sliced bread. It was that the American people said, those people are crazy and evil, and we have to keep power out of their hands to the extent that it is even humanly possible to do so. And that's where the exposure of the connections between wokeness and jihad are very bad for wokeness.
Yeah. And all opinion polls reflect this, including the Times Siena poll about the candidates that we talked about yesterday, which is a stark departure, by the way, from the summer of 2020, when a majority of the country polled said the United States is fundamentally a racist country. They were in the sway of the group of radicals who were rampaging through the streets then, before they turned on them. That is not what has happened here. Most people are on Israel's side. Most people hate the protests. Most people don't think Biden is handling Israel well. Most people think Donald Trump would do a better job handling the relations with Israel.
So anyway, that's the woke jihad. That's Abe Greenwald's lead article. You can read it right now at commentary.org. We're very proud of it. We're proud of Abe. We're proud of you because you both say it's worse than that and that it's better than that. And that ability to say both things at the same time is, I think, a mark of sophistication and a moral and acceptance of moral complexity that we try to bring you here every day. Okay, I have a commentary recommends if no one else does. It is it's an article available in the Jewish Review of Books, an excerpt from former Brandeis University President Yehuda Reinhardt's biography of Chaim Weizmann. Chaim Weizmann was the first president of the State of Israel when Israel was founded. And more importantly than that, was the leading figure in world Jewry in most of the first half of the 20th century. He was a distinguished scientist, and he was the great advocate for Zionism in the West. And because of his extraordinary pedigree as a scientific giant, was able to see the great men of his time, to advocate for the Balfour Declaration in 1917, help create institutions that became the institutions that led to the creation of the Jewish state. And this essay, this excerpt, portrays the elderly, very ill Weizmann, who was then in the Waldorf Astoria hotel in New York City, with getting the news that Israel had declared its independence and that the country was now existing. The first and best detail is that he was sorry that it was called Israel. He would have preferred it be called Judea, but nonetheless, there it is. And a lot of it is about how, though he was so sick and felt so lousy that he couldn't even be in a room with the curtains open because the light bothered his eyes so much, he was feeling very miffed because he did not seem to be getting enough, as we say, kavod, or credit or sort of honor for the role that he had played in the creation of the state. And then slowly over the next couple of days, that kavod started to come in. He was letters were written to him thanking him for his half century of work, or like, I don't know, 40 years of work to create Israel. And he had a conversation with Harry Truman he went to Washington to see Harry Truman, had a conversation with Truman, not only about recognizing Israel formally, but providing $100 million in aid so Israel could fight the war of independence. And then he was informed that he had been made the first president, not prime minister, the first president of Israel.
That was my favorite detail, by the way, when you sent me that article, was that the Associated Press notified him that he had been elected the head of state of the new state of Israel,
right,
while he was lying in his bed.
Yeah. Anyway, so this, of course, is Yom HaAtzmaut. That is Israel's celebration of its own independence is today. And there's a lot of sober talk about how, given the course of the last year and the horrors of the last year, there isn't, and with hostages still in Gaza, there isn't much to celebrate. There was always something to celebrate. Israel remains the foremost miracle in Jewish history. The recreation of the state of Israel next to the Exodus is the greatest event in Jewish history. And it's 76 years. Is it 76? Do I have the day? Okay, 76 years later, and it is still worthy of on the day of celebrating the fact that this extraordinary thing has happened that has altered the course of Jewish history, of world destiny, and that it was done by men, fragile men, proud men, men who got miffed because they weren't getting letters of congratulation fast enough after, focusing on the wrong end of the telescope because of their own pride and all that. Also a very important aspect of Jewish history, after all, is Jewish leaders getting petulant and not rising to the occasions. Anyway, the piece is called "You May View the Land from a Distance," Chaim Weizmann, May 1948. "You May View the Land from a Distance" is, of course, what God says to Moses on the verge of the Israelites crossing into the Holy Land, and Moses is going to be left to die on the far shore and not allowed to enter for a very minor crime. Very minor violation. He strikes a rock in anger or something, and Weizmann, it looks like, maybe viewing the land from a distance as he is dying in this hotel room. But the very creation of the state in May 1948 rallies him, actually, which is not quite the story but he ends up kind of recovering and serving his time as the first president. This is an excerpt from Yehuda Reinhardt's biography, which is written in Hebrew, so I don't know when it's going to come out. Well, no, it's available. It seems to be available on Amazon from Brandeis University Press. Anyway, it's really a wonderful essay. If you go to, trying to find their actual URL, the Jewish Review of Books, I think it's jrb.org, maybe.
It's jewishreviewofbooks.com.
Jewishreviewofbooks.com. But if you may view, if you just type in you may view this land from a distance, Jewish Review, it'll pop up on Google. It's today of all days. It is really,
it's on the top of their page too.
Yeah. And it is a must read. And by the way, one last thing. If you are traveling in Israel, and a great many Americans travel in Israel even now, in Rehovot, which is where the Weizmann Institute is, which is Israel's sort of MIT, Weizmann Institute was built adjacent to a house that Chaim Weizmann and his wife had built in 1936. And the house is a small museum the house is one of the best house museums in the world, because it first of all, the house looks like it's out of the Jetsons or something. It's like one of these weird, it was built to almost look space age before there was a space age, because it was built in the 1930s. So it's a fascinating visual feast just going to this house, but it tells the story of Weizmann's political work as he received visitors and plotted to help create the state of Israel, which is told through this house tour in Rehovot at the Weizmann Institute. So I strongly recommend this. My wife and I and my family, we stumbled on it because we had not been able to get in to see something else we had wanted to see nearby. And it was one of those serendipitous moments where you discover a jewel, hiding in a, it's like finding, combing on a beach and finding a perfect piece of beach glass, or with your Geiger counter finding a, gold somewhere. So that's the Weizmann Institute, the home of Chaim Weizmann, and the article in the Jewish Review of Books here on Yom HaAtzmaut. So we'll be back tomorrow. For Abe, Seth, and Christine, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.